How does it feel to be erased? To stand at the door of a world you once commanded, only to be told, you don't belong here. I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the list. Inside, laughter spilled from a table meant for family. But they hadn't forgotten her. No, they wanted her to see, to feel the weight of their rejection. Then came the voice, smooth and cruel. Oh, darling. Did you really think this dinner was for you? They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Stay. Watch. The real game starts now. The Harrington Club stood like a monument of exclusivity, its grand entrance glowing under the warm city lights. Inside, power brokers and high society elites clinked glasses, whispered deals, and indulged in an atmosphere of absolute privilege. Tonight, Ivy Wilder was supposed to be one of them. Dressed in an elegant black dress that hugged her frame with quiet authority, she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Confidence had always been her armor, but tonight, something felt off. At the reception desk, a young man in a crisp uniform barely spared her a glance before speaking. I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the list. Ruby's lips parted slightly. There must be a mistake. My husband, Knox Wilder, made the reservation. He asked me to meet him here. The receptionist finally looked up, but there was no recognition, no attempt to accommodate. Just cold indifference. If your name isn't on the list, I can't let you in. A hush of restrained whispers and judgmental stares slithered through the room. Ruby felt it, the deliberate nature of this humiliation. Her fingers curled around the strap of her clutch as realization dawned. Osiris had invited her. But he had never intended for her to walk through those doors. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Victoria Wilder emerged from the lounge, a vision of sophistication wrapped in a tailored silk gown. The matriarch of the Wilder family, flawless, ruthless, untouchable. And behind her, like obedient shadows, stood Madeline and Olivia, their smirks barely hidden behind their wine glasses. Victoria took a slow, deliberate step forward, her crimson lips curving into a knowing smile. Oh, darling, she crooned, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. Did you really think this dinner was for you? The words sliced through the air, each syllable laced with amusement. Ruby's spine stiffened. The sting of betrayal threatened to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had faced worse. She had overcome worse. She met Victoria's gaze, unblinking. This was a game. And they thought she had already lost. They had no idea who they were dealing with. A lesser woman might have faltered. A lesser woman might have turned away, swallowing the humiliation and pretending it never happened. But Ivy Wilder was not a lesser woman. She inhaled slowly, suppressing the sharp sting of betrayal, and turned to the receptionist with an air of calm authority. Get me the manager, she said, her voice even, unwavering. The receptionist hesitated. I'm afraid. Now. There was no room for argument. Something in her tone, controlled, precise, made the man flinch slightly before picking up the phone. The murmurs in the lobby grew, curiosity stirring among the onlookers. Victoria's laughter cut through the tension like a blade. Oh, this is rich, she mused, glancing at her daughters. She's actually trying to cause a scene. How desperate. Olivia smirked. Pathetic, really. Ruby remained unmoved. She knew what they wanted, a reaction. A crack in her composure. A sign that she was out of her depth. They would get nothing. Within moments, a tall, well-dressed man emerged from the main dining area. Silver hair, sharp eyes, and an air of authority that commanded respect. Daniel Harrington, the owner of the Harrington Club himself. The moment his gaze landed on Ruby, his expression shifted from curiosity to warm recognition. Ivy Wilder, he greeted, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I was wondering when you'd finally visit my establishment." The shift in energy was immediate. Victoria's smirk faltered. Osiris, who had just stepped out from the dining hall, stiffened. The entire room seemed to lean in. Ruby smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "Daniel, it's been too long." Daniel stepped forward, ignoring the stunned expressions around him. "I had no idea you were coming tonight, or I would have prepared something special for you." He turned to the receptionist. "Why wasn't Ms. Wilder escorted in immediately?" The young man paled. "Her name wasn't on the list, sir." Daniel's gaze darkened. "A mistake I expect will never happen again." He turned back to Ruby. "Come, let me personally arrange your table." Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her irritation barely masked beneath her carefully curated expression. "You think you can summon the owner of this club with a single command?" she sneered. Ruby tilted her head, her smile not faltering for a second. "I don't think, Victoria." She met the older woman's gaze, unwavering. "I know." It was in that moment that something shifted. The Wilders had always spoken of Ruby as if she were an accessory, a background character in their world. And yet, here she was, being treated with more respect than any of them. Victoria's fingers tightened around her clutch. "How do you even know Daniel Harrington?" Ruby exhaled lightly, as if deciding whether to humor her or not. Then, with deliberate patience, she spoke. "Before I married your son, I worked in financial investments. One of my primary areas of expertise. High-end restaurant chains." She let the words sink in. "Daniel was one of my earliest clients. I advised him on expanding his brand across multiple markets. Without my input, the Harrington Club wouldn't be what it is today." Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. And then Ruby delivered the final blow. "But that's not the only thing I've invested in." She let her gaze flicker to Osiris. "Is it, darling?" Osiris' jaw tightened. Daniel, sensing the tension, spoke smoothly, breaking the silence. "Ruby, let me personally arrange your table. I'd also like to send out one of our signature dishes, on the house, of course." "That sounds lovely," Ruby replied, not sparing Victoria another glance, as she followed Daniel into the restaurant. But she didn't need to look back. She knew they were watching. Knew that, for the first time, Victoria Wilder was beginning to realize. The power had never been in their hands. It had always been in hers. The tension inside the private dining room of the Harrington Club was suffocating. The air, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now crackled with something much colder. Shock. Uncertainty. Fear. Victoria Wilder sat rigidly at the head of the table, her usual air of superiority dimmed by the weight of what she had just heard. Across from her, Ivy Wilder leaned back in her chair, effortlessly poised, her fingers tracing the rim of a wine glass she had barely touched. And Osiris. He sat frozen, his grip on his fork so tight his knuckles turned white. The room had fallen silent after Ruby's revelation. That it wasn't her who had been dependent on Osiris, but the other way around. Victoria exhaled sharply, her eyes narrowing. "That's a bold claim, Ruby. Do you have proof?" Ruby barely spared her a glance before reaching into her purse and pulling out a sleek black folder. She placed it on the table with a soft thud, then pushed it forward. "See for yourself." Victoria hesitated for only a second before flipping it open. The first page alone made her lips press into a thin line. Detailed reports. Financial transactions. Paper trails leading directly to Osiris. Transfers from her family's accounts, funneled through multiple businesses to cover his failed investments. Money he had claimed was being used to expand Wilder Enterprises, but in reality, had been used to fix his mistakes. Madeline and Olivia leaned in, their faces paling as they took in the damning evidence. Osiris shifted in his seat. "Mom, I can explain." Victoria's gaze snapped up, sharp as glass. "Osiris." Her voice was steel. A single word, yet it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. Osiris swallowed hard. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you use our family's money to cover your failures?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Ruby, then back at his mother. And then, instead of denying it, he did the worst thing possible. He said nothing. The silence confirmed everything. Victoria's fingers curled over the edge of the documents, her breath coming out in slow, measured inhales. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm. "You let me believe that Ruby was the one clinging to you. That she was nothing but an opportunist." She looked at him with something dangerously close to disgust. "But all this time, you have been the parasite." Osiris flinched. "Mom. Enough." She slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed through the room, final and absolute. She turned back to Ruby, her gaze calculating. "I owe you an apology." The words were bitter, but honest. "But I don't just want to apologize. I want to correct my mistake." Ruby raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And how do you plan to do that?" Victoria exhaled, as if coming to terms with something she never thought she would say. "By giving you what should have been yours all along." She straightened, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who made decisions that reshaped empires. "I want you to take over Wilder Enterprises." The entire table stiffened. Osiris bolted upright. "What?" Ruby, for the first time that evening, looked truly surprised. "You're serious?" Victoria nodded, her expression unreadable. "You have talent. Intelligence. The ability to lead. Everything my son lacks." She turned to Osiris, her voice turning sharp again. "You don't deserve to run this company. You never did. You just rode on Ruby's brilliance while pretending it was your own." Osiris looked at his mother as if she had physically struck him. "You can't do this," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "This is my company." Victoria's gaze was ice. "Not anymore." Silence fell. Ruby studied the scene before her, the weight of the offer settling over her like a second skin. She had spent years being underestimated, disrespected, cast aside. Now, the very people who had tried to break her were offering her the throne. She tilted her head, considering. "And what about Osiris?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "He will work under you." The words sliced through the room like a guillotine. Osiris stared at his mother in shock. "You can't be serious." Victoria's expression didn't waver. "You want to prove you're not useless," she said coolly. "Then start at the bottom and work your way up. Prove to me that you deserve the position you were given." The air in the room froze. Osiris' face twisted, a mix of fury, humiliation, and disbelief warring inside him. "You're choosing her over your own son." Victoria's gaze didn't soften. "No, Osiris. You made this choice. When you chose to lie. When you chose to be weak." His hands clenched into fists, his entire body shaking. But there was nothing he could say. Nothing he could do. The decision had been made. Ruby exhaled slowly, letting the power of the moment settle in. "Well then," she murmured, taking a slow sip of her wine. She placed the glass down, leveling Osiris with a calm, assessing look. "I suppose I'll see you in the office on Monday." Assistant. Osiris' face went pale. And just like that, the balance of power had shifted. The weight of the moment lingered long after the decision had been made. The private dining room, once a stage for Ruby's humiliation, was now eerily silent, except for the sound of Osiris' uneven breathing. He was still reeling, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of what had just happened. His mother, the woman who had once placed him above everything, had just stripped him of his power and handed it to her. Ruby sat across from him, composed, unshaken. The woman they had tried to break was now the one holding all the cards. Victoria turned to Ruby, her voice softer than before, though still carrying the steel of a woman unaccustomed to admitting fault. "I was wrong about you," she said. "I see that now." For the first time, there was no venom, no underlying condescension. Only honesty. Ruby tilted her head slightly, studying Victoria with careful consideration. "I know why you did what you did," she said, a small smile ghosting her lips. "You were only trying to protect your family. You just never realized that I was never the threat." Victoria exhaled, her gaze unwavering. "Can you forgive me?" A long pause stretched between them. Then Ruby let out a soft, almost amused chuckle. "I can forgive you, Victoria." She leaned forward slightly. "Because I understand you." Victoria nodded, accepting the answer. Then Ruby's gaze shifted to Osiris. Her expression hardened. "But Osiris is a different matter." Osiris flinched at her words, his jaw tightening. Victoria, surprisingly, didn't argue. Instead, she turned away from her son, a look of quiet disappointment settling over her features. Osiris could feel it, the shift, the loss. His mother had always backed him, no matter what. But now, she didn't even look at him. It was Ruby's gaze he had to face. He swallowed, forcing himself to speak. "Ruby." His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed forward. I know I don't deserve it, but can you give me a chance?" Ruby held his stare, her expression unreadable. "A chance," she echoed. Osiris nodded desperately. "To prove myself. To fix this. To fix us." For a moment, something flickered in Ruby's eyes. Nostalgia, perhaps. A memory of the man she had once loved, before he had chosen silence over loyalty. Before he had let his family tear her down. But whatever that flicker was, it faded just as quickly as it appeared. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Osiris," she said, her voice steady, "for years, I stood by you. I fought for you. I defended you when no one else would. And in return, you let them treat me like I was nothing. Like I didn't belong." Osiris opened his mouth, but Ruby held up a hand, silencing him. "You never fought for me," she continued, her tone not angry, just resigned. "You never chose me." Osiris' hands curled into fists on the table. He wanted to argue. To tell her it wasn't true. That he had loved her, that he had cared. But the words stuck in his throat. Because deep down, he knew. She was right. And so, for the first time in his life, Knox Wilder had nothing to say. Ruby studied him for a moment longer, then slowly rose from her chair. She smoothed out the fabric of her dress, her movements precise and controlled. Then she looked him dead in the eyes and spoke the words that sealed his fate. "If you want to prove you're worthy of me, Osiris," she paused, letting the weight of her next words sink in, "do it through your actions. Not your words." Osiris felt something crack inside him. This wasn't just about business. This was about her. Her love. Her respect. And she was telling him, in no uncertain terms, that she was done waiting for him to be the man she had once believed in. Ruby turned and walked toward the door. She didn't look back. Osiris sat frozen, his entire body rigid with the realization of what he had lost. As the door shut behind Ruby, a heavy silence filled the room. Victoria, still seated at the head of the table, finally looked at her son. But there was no sympathy in her gaze. Only quiet expectation. "Well," she said coolly. "Are you going to sit there and wallow? Or are you finally going to prove you deserve the life you've been handed?" Osiris clenched his jaw, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, there was no safety net. No mother to shield him. No wife to save him. If he wanted redemption, he would have to earn it. A year had passed. Wilder Enterprises, once an empire teetering on the edge of collapse due to reckless leadership, now stood stronger than ever. Under Ivy Wilder's command, it had become a powerhouse in the financial world, leaner, sharper, more profitable than it had been in decades. The old board members, once skeptical of a woman who married into wealth, now sang a different tune. Investors trusted her. Competitors feared her. And Victoria Wilder, once her fiercest critic, was now her staunchest ally. In the grand office overlooking the city skyline, Ruby sat behind the massive mahogany desk, her desk. The very same one Osiris had once occupied. Now, his name was just a footnote in the company's history. She glanced down at the reports in front of her, satisfaction curling at the edges of her lips. Another quarter of record-breaking profits. Another sign that she had won. A knock on the door. "Come in," she said, not looking up. The door opened, and a familiar presence stepped inside. She knew who it was without even needing to lift her gaze. Knox Wilder. But not the man she had once known. The arrogance that had once draped over him like a designer suit was gone. His expensive, custom-tailored wardrobe had been replaced with something simpler. More refined. His posture was different, still tall, still proud, but there was a weight to it now. A sense of earned confidence rather than entitlement. "You asked to see me," he said, his voice careful. Ruby finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Yes." She gestured to the seat in front of her. "Sit." Osiris obeyed, though something in his demeanor had changed. The old him would have leaned back, smirking, trying to charm his way through the conversation. But now he sat with quiet patience, waiting for her to speak. Ruby folded her hands on the desk. "It's been a year." "I know." His gaze never wavered. "I've changed." She arched an eyebrow. "So I've heard. Word is, you've been working your way up from the bottom. No shortcuts. No favors." Osiris nodded. "I had to." His jaw tightened slightly. "I wanted to understand what it meant to earn something. Not just have it handed to me." Ruby leaned back, studying him. This was the man she had always hoped he could be. But was it too late? "And why are you here now, Osiris?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "To prove yourself? Or to prove something to me?" He exhaled slowly, his fingers lacing together. "Both." A flicker of something, regret? Hope, passed through his eyes. "I lost you because I was weak. Because I let my pride, my family, and my fear of failure define me." He paused. "I won't make that mistake again." For the first time in a long time, Ruby saw sincerity in his gaze. No excuses. No manipulation. Just raw, honest truth. But she wasn't the same woman who had once waited for him to see her. She didn't need him anymore. And that was the difference. She smiled, gentle, but firm. "I believe you've changed, Osiris." She saw the flicker of hope in his eyes before she continued, "But whether that change is enough, is no longer up to you. He swallowed hard, nodding once. I understand. For the first time, the power was hers. Not his. Not Victoria's. Not the Wilder family's. Hers. As Osiris stood, preparing to leave, Ruby called out to him one last time. Osiris. He turned back, waiting. She met his gaze, her voice steady. If you ever truly become the man I once believed you could be, then maybe, one day, we'll see where we stand. A slow, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Not victorious. Not arrogant. Just hopeful. I'll be waiting. And with that, he walked away, not as a man who had lost, but as a man who had finally begun to earn. Ruby turned back to her window, watching the city she now ruled. She had fought. She had won. And this time, the power was in her hands, where it belonged. Power. For so long, the Wilders had believed it was something inherited, something passed down through bloodlines and last names. They had mistaken wealth for strength, privilege for intelligence. But Ivy Wilder had rewritten the rules. She hadn't come from old money. She hadn't been born into power. She had built herself. Brick by brick. Battle by battle. And now, as she stood at the pinnacle of success, she understood something the Wilders never had. True power doesn't come from where you were born. It comes from what you do. Victoria Wilder, once her greatest enemy, now stood beside her, not as a superior, but as an ally. The woman who had once tried to break her was now the one ensuring she thrived. Knox Wilder, the man who had let her down time and time again, had finally begun to understand what it meant to earn something. He had lost her, but in doing so, he had found himself. And Ruby. She was no longer the woman who waited for permission. No longer the wife who stood in the shadows. No longer the outsider begging for a seat at the table. She owned the table now. Because when a woman realizes her own worth, when she refuses to let the world define her, she doesn't just play the game. She changes it.